Good afternoon and welcome to the NARUC Innovation Webinar, Hydropower, Regulatory Strategies to Enhance Hydro's Contribution to Resilience and Reliability, which is part of the NARUC Innovation Webinar series. My name is Danielle Sass-Burnett. I'm the Director of NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation, and I'm going to give you just a minute or two of background on the organization sponsoring today's webinar. Next slide, please. NARUC, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, is the only nonprofit organization dedicated to serving utility commissioners and commission staff across all of the states and territories, focused on ensuring our members are able to serve the public interest. The NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation, which hosts the Innovation Webinar series, builds relationships, develops resources, and delivers training to support NARUC members to ensure that they are well informed and have the resources that they need to support their decision making. The work we do spans many energy topics, including those covered during today's webinar. You can find out more on our website. We also host other events and educational opportunities. We have a series of virtual events and webinars coming up over the next few weeks prior to the NARUC Summer Policy Summit, which will be in West Palm Beach, Florida, which is open to all interested parties, members, stakeholders, and others. You can find out more and register for any of these events through the NARUC website. I just dropped the link in the chat. For today's webinar, we are grateful to have moderation provided by Commissioner Tom Plant from the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. Commissioner Plant was appointed more than about a year and a half ago. He has previously served as the director of the Governor's Energy Office in Colorado, as well as a member of the state legislature in Colorado, and is going to lead us through our speakers and presentations today. We will offer Q&A in the chat, Q&A through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. There is a question mark button that you can press at any time. We invite you to submit questions throughout the presentation. We will also pause after each speaker for any clarifying questions, and then have a broader Q&A period for all the speakers at the end. Commissioner Plant, thank you for being here. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Danielle, and welcome to everybody to this great discussion on hydropower. We've got a fantastic lineup for you today, and really excited about the conversation that we're going to have and the folks that we have participating. We're going to start out the webinar this morning with Malcolm Woolf. And Malcolm is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Hydropower Association. He has decades of experience in the energy and environmental field, including Senior Vice President with Advanced Energy Economy and now Advanced Energy United, I think they're called, and has extensive market experience. He served in the cabinet under Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, where he worked to promote affordable, reliable, clean energy, and also led energy policy for the National Governors Association. His experience in both the executive branch at Capitol Hill, having served at the EPA, and also as a congressional committee staff member. I'm really happy to have my old friend Malcolm Woolf here with us. And I think, Malcolm, you're going to drive your presentation directly. Is that correct? Looks like it.
All right. Can you hear me and see me?
We can.
All right.
It's all yours. Great. Thanks, Malcolm.
Fantastic. Tom, great to see you again. Saw those banjos in the backdrop there. I've had the opportunity to hear Tom play the banjo. That would be a great NARUC event. Get Tom and maybe other commissioners to do a jam session at a NARUC or NASIO event. Really pleased to be here today. Wanted to share with this group what state regulators need to know about the current threats to hydropower and its impact on reliability. As Tom mentioned, I'm a former state official, worked as head of the State Energy Office and as chair of the National Association of State Energy Officials. So I have a little bit of a state perspective, state bias. and was trying to think through, as I put together today's presentation, what is it that state regulators would need to know. So first thing you need to know is that we've got hydropower in 49 states. And yes, Mississippi is the one state that does not have hydropower. So if you're not sure what hydropower is in your state, I put a URL at the bottom there, hydro.org/map. The map you see on your screen is amazing. It is a new map that we're just going to go live with shortly. We don't have it live for today's presentation, but it will enable you to go in, find every facility, get as detailed as you want. Who's the owner? What's the megawattage? Is it active? What congressional district is it in? But we've got a basic map still on our website, hydro.org/map. So we do have hydropower in almost every state. And we're actually essential to the grid, although I think we're often overlooked or taken for granted. I wanted to make 3 points here. First, we're 100 gigawatts, over 100 gigawatts of dispatchable carbon-free electricity. So it's 30% of US renewables, 80 gigawatts of existing hydropower capacity. Most of that is reservoir hydropower, but some of it is run-of-river. There's also over 22 gigawatts of pump storage capacity, which amounts to the vast majority of existing electricity storage capacity. I'm a big fan of batteries. They're a wonderful 2-hour solution, and they're going gangbusters. But if you want long duration energy storage, something that could last reliably every time the sun sets, every time there's a cloud bank that lasts for a few hours, a cloudy day or a cloudy week, you're going to need long duration energy storage. Hydropower is really useful for that. We're still the #1 renewable around the globe. And there's a whole array of emerging new marine energy technologies, wave, tidal, current energy. In fact, the Department of Energy a couple of years ago did a potential study and found that that water power, these wave, tidal, and current technologies could provide power to 57% of US electricity load, which is a staggering amount. So even if we achieve only 10% of the technical capacity, that's still more power than solar is providing today. The second reason that hydro is critical to the grid and why you guys should be thinking about it is about 24/7 reliability. Just a couple quick stories. First, I don't think it was last summer. I think it was either last summer or the summer before, midst of the mega heat wave out in the West, California during the middle of the day had 2,000 megawatts of solar that it couldn't use. It just had excess solar on the grid that it was forced to curtail. And at the same time, the state energy office was talking to the governor about an emergency alert that evening because they knew that when the sun set, they were going to lose that solar generation and they didn't have a way to keep the lights on. And so, as I think the Hydro Review article showed, natural gas and hydro provided the electricity during the California heat wave. Demand response played a role as well. The governor had to tweet out, "Turn off your power, we're trying to keep the lights on," and people responded. But hydropower was able to save its power during the day, save its water behind the reservoirs, knowing that we've got excess solar. Let's save our water during the day, release it as the solar cycled off, and we produce 7,000 more megawatts than we usually do in an evening to help keep the lights on. Overall, we're all aware of the horrible drought in the Colorado River, but it is not one of the things we're finding is that the weather is local. And while the Colorado River is having a tremendous drought period, that's not true for all of California. That's not true for the Pacific Northwest. And there was a PNNL report about a year or so ago saying that even in the face of the Western mega drought, hydropower still has a capacity factor of over 80%. So don't let the pictures from the Colorado River mislead you into thinking that that is a national phenomenon. It's a horrible situation, but it is much more local or regional. The final reason why you should care about hydropower is what I sometimes call our secret superpower. We provide an awful lot of essential grid services. So this is a chart, I think it's from PJM a couple years ago, where on the top it listed all of the major technologies, and down the left column it lists the product. and whether you're well-suited, neutral, or poorly situated. And you could see that reservoir hydropower, or they called it pondage hydropower, was the only technology to be well-suited for everything, whether it's day-ahead market or real-time trading or regulation or spinning reserves. We know as we retire more coal, as we retire more nuclear or other aging assets, we're going to need spinning reserves. We've got plenty now, but as wind and solar continue to dominate, we're going to get to a point in the not too distant future where we're going to need spinning reserves and all of these other technologies. My favorite example, I guess, is black start. We're about 6 or 7% of generation, but hydropower provides about 40% of black start. So that's why we're important to the grid. But what folks often don't appreciate is that we're at real risk of going away. There's 459 facilities set whose licenses expire between now and 2035. And it takes, on average, 7.5 years to get relicensed, but often it takes a lot longer. The Hells Canyon dams in Idaho, I think it's 20 years plus, and they're still not relicensed. They keep being able to operate on a 1 year by 1 year license extension, but you're not going to make major investments in the facility or in environmental improvements or dam safety improvements if you only have a 1 year license. Relicensing is typically when facilities shut down, when they choose to give up their license. It costs for a major facility at least $1 million. For facility of any over 100 megawatts, it's $10 million or more, and that's just for the paperwork of the licensing process. If the licensing requires you to expand your spillway or put in more elaborate fish passage, then you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And for better or worse, we've had 65 facilities that have chosen not to continue their license over the last, I think that's the last 5 or 6 years. And a recent survey found that 36% of hydro asset owners said they were actively considering decommissioning a facility. So most of the climate modeling I've seen and resource adequacy models that I've seen kind of assume that hydropower won't grow, but they also assume that hydropower won't go away. And frankly, I think that both assumptions are wrong. Among the challenges that the hydropower industry is having is lack of parity in the tax code. Even with the Inflation Reduction Act, it supports new generation that's carbon free. It doesn't support existing generation. So if you're building new solar, new wind, fantastic. New hydro, fantastic. But the current fleet is debating about investing in relicensing the existing fleet versus building more wind and solar. And you can get tax support for wind and solar, even though it's an asset that only lasts, 15 years. The hydropower facility can, if you maintain it properly, we call it a forever asset. The one exception to this is nuclear, where the IRA provides $30 billion to preserve existing carbon-free nuclear, but doesn't provide any money for existing carbon-free water power, which is, again, a threat to the relicensing. We have an antiquated licensing process where it may take 7.5 plus years, but you don't know what it's going to look like at the end. And there's also market design failures. The example I shared earlier of hydropower saving its water during the day to provide power when the grid needs it, whether that's in the evening when the solar sunsets or when a nuclear plant trips off or whatever it is, we're not adequately paid for that flexibility or for the essential grid services. So there's a lot of reasons why individual facilities may choose simply to not bother going through license renewal and let their plant sunset. And that may be rational for the individual facility, but it has real consequences for the grid. And I'm not sure that state PUCs and governor's energy offices are having the conversation with the facilities in their state. Hey, when is your license up? You need to be doing this 10 years in advance, having these conversations and figuring out what is it going to take. Do you need that asset? Do you need it to stay online? And if so, what's it going to take to keep them online? They really could use your help. Final point that I wanted to share is that this isn't your grandfather's hydropower industry. We've been working tremendously over the last really several decades to repair a lot of the environmental legacy from frankly a century ago. And most recently, in just the last 3 or 4 years, we've got this very coordinated effort through Stanford University called the Uncommon Dialogue. And we've joined a formal collaboration with our traditional adversaries, environmental groups like American Rivers and Union of Concerned Scientists and World Wildlife Fund, and working closely with tribal groups. And we've come together on a formal collaboration. We work together on the infrastructure law. We've coalesced around the fact that there's 90,000 dams in this country, 90,000 that are over, I think, a 25-foot head, and only 3%, 2,500, are powered. So to say that set differently, 97% of the dams in this country are not powered. They're used for flood control, irrigation, navigation, water storage, recreation. Typically, the ones that are powered, they added power to offset the costs of providing those other services. So when a hydro facility chooses to surrender its license, it turns off its powerhouse, the dam stays because the dam is still needed for all those other water storage, flood control purposes, but now someone else has to pay and maintain it. So we work together with the environmental industry, a number of tribal groups, state dam safety officials, came up with the 3 R's. Let's retrofit dams that are still needed, but they don't have power. Let's rehabilitate the facilities that are unsafe, and let's remove facilities that are unpowered and are no longer necessary. So based on those 3 R's, working very collaboratively together across all sorts of lines to accelerate the clean energy transition and 24/7 reliability. So I will stop sharing now, and I think you said we were going to pause a moment or two for questions or clarifications.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A, and we'll follow up with Malcolm. I just had one clarifying question. So you mentioned that the tax advantages of new clean generation wouldn't apply for relicensing. But if there are upgrades within the process of that relicensing, does that get a tax advantage? And then the other part of that is, you mentioned, I think 97% of the existing impoundments are unpowered. Would adding generation to those existing impoundments again qualify for that tax advantage?
Yeah, great question, Tom. The answer is yes and yes. So just to flesh it out, if you've got a 100 megawatt facility and during relicensing you invest in turbine upgrades and it makes you a 101 megawatt facility, great, you've expanded the facility. It's an incremental increase in capacity, so 1 megawatt would count for the tax credit.
Gotcha.
Only that incremental increase, not the full 100. But if you've got a non-power dam, it's currently generating 0, add generation to that existing dam, all of that generation would count.
Oh, fantastic.
And we're actively talking with with Treasury, because for wind and solar, they've taken advantage of something called repowering, the so-called 80-20 rule. If you repower an old wind farm, put on new blades or something, as long as you spend 80% of the fair market value, Treasury will consider that a new wind farm that qualifies for the tax credit. We think that has huge potential for hydropower. If you invest in the existing powerhouse, again, 80-20 rule, that can maybe make your facility considered a new facility. And I think that will encourage facilities to keep the existing fleet and repower, retrofit. Under that scenario, if you make the Treasury test, then maybe the whole facility could be considered new generation. So
fantastic. Well, thank you, Malcolm. And we'll have some time, hopefully at the end, for any other questions if folks have additional questions. Appreciate the presentation, Malcolm. That was great. Next up, we have Clark Mather. Clark is the Executive Director of Northwest RiverPartners. His extensive career showcases a focus on government affairs, public engagement, and strategic leadership. And prior to Northwest RiverPartners, he spent 11 years with the Tacoma Public Utilities, the last 7 as the organization's government affairs officer. At Tacoma Public Utilities, he led a team that builds relationships with community leaders, government decision makers, and sovereign nation American tribes to achieve a variety of impactful outcomes. Mather also led a regional coalition that partnered with the Army Corps of Engineers, Congress, and the Biden administration to secure more than $220 million in funding for downstream fish passage at Howard Hanson Dam. Mr. Mathers also worked in various roles in Congress. Throughout his congressional service, Mathers focused on important regional issues, including energy, water, public lands, economic development, and agriculture. So Clark, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And I invite you to play your banjo or any of the other stringed instruments behind you if I'm running over time. Maybe that'd be a way to get you into this. But thank you for the opportunity to be here with the folks at NARUC. And Malcolm, thank you for your presentation. Of course, all the great work that you and NHA do. So again, as the Commissioner said, I'm Clark Mather. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest RiverPartners. Maybe if we could advance a couple of slides, Jessica. Thank you. Yeah, so Northwest RiverPartners is a group based in Vancouver, Washington, and we have about 90 members across 7 states in the Pacific Northwest. Yes, we have consumer-owned utilities that are strongly invested in educating folks in the Northwest about the hydropower system that we really depend on here in this part of the country. But we also have river transportation businesses that provide supplies to the broader electrical system, agricultural groups, and others that are part of our membership. So we're a little different than the normal hydropower trade association. And again, our goal is to tell the story of hydropower. And that story of hydropower is long and it's enduring and it's really important in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm really glad to talk about not only existing hydropower, but exciting new opportunities like pump storage that's being developed just a few miles from here in the Pacific Northwest, and talk about how that fits into affordability and reliability. Now it's meeting some really important challenges that we're facing, not only here in the region, but throughout the West. Next slide, please. So just to level set this a little bit, hydropower is the backbone of the Northwest. It's the backbone of our economy. It's the backbone of the electricity that flows to businesses and customers. And it's been that way for a long time in this part of the country. So hydropower in the Northwest has existed for at least 100 years. At Tacoma Public Utilities, where I last came from, we had hydropower generating assets dating back to 1912. The federal dams on the Columbia and Snake Rivers have been in place since as early as 1938. And so it really is the core generating resource here in the Pacific Northwest. Things are changing. We have climate policies that have been enacted by some of the states here in the Northwest. We've seen coal generation retirements. We've seen an increase in wind and solar and other intermittent renewables. But still today, this is information from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. Hydropower capacity, you'll see it in that kind of darker blue slice of the pie there. Hydropower nameplate capacity is still more than half of the nameplate capacity we have in the Pacific Northwest. So it is a really important generating source for us out here in this part of the country. Next slide, please. There are a lot of things changing, and I would argue that there are some conflicts that are here and that are going to be exacerbated over the next few years as we see really tremendous load growth here in this part of the country. I know we're not unique in that way, but also conversations about breaching dams, removing dams, reducing that hydropower output that's really foundational here. And again, I would argue is an asset throughout the West. So one thing I want to mention in terms of load growth is the Pacific Northwest Utilities Conference Committee, which is a group of investor-owned utilities and consumer-owned utilities here in our region, does an annual report to project load growth and what they're seeing here in our region and the ability for existing generating resources to meet customer needs. Their most recent report, which came out in May, projects a 30% increase in load growth in the Pacific Northwest over the next 10 years. That is at least the third straight year they've had to increase that projection of energy usage, electricity usage in the Pacific Northwest. And it's the highest rate of load growth we've seen, I think, in 4 decades. They project, PNUC projects that we're going to need to provide an additional 7,000 megawatts of generation in the Northwest, and of course, find transmission to provide that energy to customers. Just to put that in perspective, the average electricity usage in the city of Seattle is about 1,000 megawatts. So that's more than 7 Seattle's worth of energy usage here in our region. I'll also just share that the Western Electric Coordinating Council, I just want to read this, singled out the Pacific Northwest in their 2023 Western Assessment of Resource Adequacy. They said, quote, most of the demand at risk hours are in the Northwest subregion, a result of the large demand growth that area is seeing from data center expansion. So we're seeing data center expansion really ramp up in this region as people want access to that clean, reliable hydropower system. We're also seeing a real focus on electrification. We're seeing population growth here in the Northwest, and that is really straining the grid. Again, at the same time, there are conversations, and Malcolm talked about this in his presentations, about removing dams or reducing the output of the federal system. The conversations on relicensing that Malcolm talked about are challenges to non-federal dam owners. We, from Northwest River Partners perspective, argue that in order to meet the energy demands that PNUC and WEC are noticing in terms of the demands we need not only in the Northwest, but throughout the West, that we need to keep the hydropower we have. We need to look at cool new opportunities like pump storage and grow a whole bunch of additional carbon-free resources and additional resources to keep the lights on, keep businesses going, and keep people safe and warm. And that's what I'm going to talk about next in terms of some of the extreme weather challenges that we've been increasingly seeing. So could we advance 2 slides, please? So the extreme weather is affecting all of us. We certainly follow the news in places like Texas and other parts of the country that are seeing different forms of extreme weather. We have seen more and more instances of not only extreme weather in the summertime. Yes, it does get above 100 degrees and sometimes up above 110, 115 degrees in some parts of the Northwest in the summertime. But we're traditionally a winter peaking region here in the Pacific Northwest, and we have seen real examples of strains on the grid where the hydropower system has stepped in, but we've also had to import energy at times to the region, particularly in the wintertime, but also export power to other regions to keep people safe, cool, or warm, depending on the season. So this last Martin Luther King weekend, we had a really unique set of circumstances. We had one of the most significant cold snaps we've seen in the Pacific Northwest in 2 decades. We had a natural gas generating station or natural gas storage facility go offline for a period of time in the Northwest. And can we go to the next slide, please? And we had a real lack of wind and solar generation here in our region. So this is a complex slide. If you could just follow the green line, you'll see that that green line stands for variable energy resources. That includes wind and solar. And one of the things I've learned is that in extreme cold weather and extreme warm weather, wind tends to go away. And of course, in the wintertime in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly this far north when it's cloudy, there's not a lot of solar on the system. So that combination of extreme cold, temperatures at 30 to even 40 below zero in places like Western Montana, wind chill factors below zero in broad parts of the Pacific Northwest, the ability of natural gas being hampered by that storage facility outage, and the lack of wind and solar really put us in a bind. So could you go to the next slide, please, Jessica? We had to really rely on hydropower, our nuclear plant that we have at the Columbia Generating Station in Central Washington, and imports from other parts of the country to really keep the lights on and keep people safe. Energy prices skyrocketed to as high as $2,000 a megawatt hour. So if you're a utility operator, particularly if you're Bonneville in charge of a regional balancing authority, or you're a utility in charge of your own smaller balancing authority, you face the very hard but frankly obvious decision: do you keep the lights on and buy that power, or do you get into a situation where you have rolling blackouts, particularly in places again like Montana where you had temperatures approaching 30 or 40 below zero? So the hydro system really stepped in. Remember, I talked about the fact that the hydropower system provides about 50% of the nameplate capacity in the Northwest. During that weekend, next slide, please, Jessica, the hydro system stepped in to provide 70% of the energy to keep the lights on. Even with that, we still had to do those imports from other parts of the country to keep the lights on and to keep rates as affordable as possible in our region. But it really is an example of how important the hydropower system is for resiliency the ability to ramp up, including the Snake River dams, which have been a topic of controversy. They provided about 1,100 megawatt of sustained peaking capability. That has been a reoccurring thing that we've seen in the Northwest. Having that hydropower system that can really ramp up as we have extreme weather is really important. Malcolm talked about the 2022 heat wave in California. That is a really unfortunate circumstance, and I did not relish putting these headlines on this page. But I think this is an example of how these extreme weather events really do impact communities, they impact human health, and how keeping the lights on, keeping people cool in the summertime and warm in the winter is really, really important. So this is an example, as Malcolm talked about, there was regional hydropower in California. There were other resources that were called upon, but in this case, and it was actually a unique case in the Northwest, where we had hydropower capacity that we could send over the intertie south, as we often do in the summer, to help California deal with what was an extreme weather event in September. As Malcolm talked about, the CAISO put in place warnings for emergency demand response among its customers. But hydropower from BPA and British Columbia provided about 6 gigawatts of energy at really important times in the late afternoon and early evening periods. So hydropower is not only important in a place like the Pacific Northwest that relies on hydropower significantly day to day, but it also provides resilience even beyond the borders of a particular region. Last slide, please. So again, I just want to echo some of the points that Malcolm made. Hydropower is a really essential, proven baseload generation resource. We know in the Northwest, and as Malcolm talked about, in 49 states around the country, hydropower is an affordable, reliable, and clean generating resource. So at Northwest RiverPartners, we say that if you believe that energy should be affordable, that we should continue to provide electricity that's affordable to people, and help avoid regressive impacts on the underserved people in our communities, you should support hydropower. If you believe in providing reliable electricity at all hours, particularly as we deal with these extreme weather events, you should support hydropower. If you believe that climate change and greenhouse gas emissions are among the biggest challenges facing all living and breathing things in the United States and the world, you should support hydropower. So we really do need policies. Malcolm talked about a lot of federal policies that are in place. We really need a recognition and support from groups like NARUC and others to not only put policies in place that recognize all of the amazing attributes and proven attributes of hydropower, but we need to lend your voices to the conversation. Congress, your state legislatures, your governor's offices really need to understand that we're in a really challenging situation in terms of load growth and things like data centers, and hydropower is that proven, reliable resource that can meet those needs. So I think with that, Commissioner, I'll turn it back over to you and happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Clark. That was a great presentation. Just one clarifying question. You mentioned about 7,000 megawatts of additional demand coming, much of that from data centers, electrification. What do you see as the role of hydro in the Northwest to meet that additional demand? Or is hydro there to support other more variable resources that may be added to meet the demand, or are the time frames for adding hydro matching the time frames for when that demand comes on? Or how are you thinking about that in the Northwest?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the first thing is, and I think I mentioned this, we need to protect the hydropower resources that we have where it makes sense. So maintaining the federal system, making sure that the non-federal operators have certainty in terms of regulations, looking at common sense relicensing reforms that the National Hydropower Association and its members are supporting. I think providing that type of regulatory and cost certainty is really, really important. I would also say that looking at really cool new pump storage projects, we've got a project up in Klickitat County, Washington, that would add about 1,200 megawatts of capacity to the system, 8 hours of storage. That is a really great opportunity to add additional clean energy capacity to our system where you've got transmission built and allow us to meet those growing demands. But even with all of that, and even with the existing generating resource we have, it's very clear that we're going to have to add additional generation and, of course, additional transmission to meet those needs and to meet our current needs. So there's a lot of work to do in a really short period of time, but we would say that hydropower needs to stay in place so that that kind of hole that we're in right now over the next 10 years doesn't get deeper and more challenging to deal with.
Great. Thanks a lot, Clark. Appreciate the presentation. And again, we'll have some time, hopefully at the end, for any other follow-up questions that we might have. So our final speaker today, batting cleanup here, is Corey Vezina. Corey manages the hydropower program within the Water Power Technologies Office at DOE. And the mission of WPTO's hydropower program is to conduct research, development, demonstration, and commercial activities to advance transformative, cost-effective, reliable, and environmentally sustainable hydropower and pump storage technologies. The hydropower program seeks to better understand and capitalize on opportunities for these technologies in support of the nation's rapidly evolving grid, while also improving energy, water infrastructure, and security. In 2013, Corey began his career with DOE supporting the State and Community Energy Programs Office. He came to beautiful Golden, Colorado, where he joined WPTO as a technical project officer. He has a BS in Natural Resource Management from the University of Maryland and an MS in Energy Policy and Climate from Johns Hopkins University. So, Corey, ready to hand it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you, everyone else, for participating today and joining today. Thank you, Naruk. And to Malcolm and Clark for kicking us off. I mean, I think it's great to hear. I was taking a lot of notes as you guys were talking. I feel like a lot of what you're presenting and discussing feeds directly into the work that we do here at DOE. If you go to the next, I think, 2 slides. So next slide, there you go. I forgot some of my bio already mentioned what we do for WPTO, but the key thing to remember is with the Water Power Technology Office, we enable research, R&D, to better test and advance and support marine energy, hydropower, and pump storage, and how it supports the grid. Through some basic numbers here for the 2 different technologies we support in WPTO on the hydro side and the marine side. What we kind of do with marine, it's some of the tech we're looking at, wave, tidal, river, ocean thermal. But for hydro, while we're here today, we really look at ways we could support modernizing these existing fleets, researching pump storage, hydropower, which we heard a lot about already, understanding those opportunities for new low impact projects, and really also thinking about what we can do to better understand the grid, the challenges we're facing, and the opportunities we have for us. Slide. So I think we already mentioned some of this. This is just kind of giving an overview for everybody what the vision and mission of WPTO. But one thing really I want to highlight is what we look at a lot is understanding how hydropower can support our rapidly evolving grid, the changing needs. You heard Clark talk about the massive heat extremes that they're facing, also those significant cold snaps. How does hydropower step up and support the grid when we're facing these new climate extremes and new climate challenges? How can we ensure that the grid is reliable and all these new variable renewable energy resources are properly integrated, and what can hydropower do to support them? Next slide. So just covering in this a little bit more, there's a lot of different opportunities. Malcolm and Clark already touched on it, but we really want to support and enable that 100% clean energy future. How can hydropower and pump storage provide that flexibility, inertia, storage, the grid services to support our variable renewables like wind and solar? What new value propositions are available to us in that low impact, the conduit hydropower that you see in the top right, non-powered dams? As Malcolm mentioned, 97% of dams in this country are not powered. What can we do to better get power to those dams, add capacity to them, to existing facilities or where there's been no power added before? Really, we also want to look at understanding the environmental impacts of hydropower. Our environmental R&D portfolio looks to study how we can avoid, reduce, and mitigate those environmental impacts, reduce the costs, the time and permitting of hydropower licensing, understand how to better navigate the permitting process, and really improve the value of hydropower while protecting our natural resources. Another big factor is understanding climate change. How do we adapt to the impacts from climate change on our hydropower facilities, on our pump storage facilities? What can we do to advance the climate and hydrologic science? And how can we couple that with our decision making for hydropower? What tools can we produce to better understand how to manage our systems? And just overall, all this ties into how we have to build out a 21st century hydropower fleet. You know, what can we do to modernize our existing fleet? How can we restore and provide reliable performance of our fleet while adding cutting edge technology? Next slide. So I want to just talk about a number of opportunities or other initiatives we've done, we've conducted here at WPTO in ways folks might be interested or just knowing how we try to serve and support the hydropower community. Recently, we've been helping out with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, trying to put together a case study to better help understand the resources of non-power dams that are available in Pennsylvania, where they can, so to speak, put the most, get the most bang for their buck in terms of trying to add power to these non-power dams. So we've created some decision support making tools to help get these projects in the water. We've heard that, you know, non-power dams or NPDs, they're a huge focus for us because they're already existing facilities. You know, retrofitting them with hydropower can provide a revenue source to revitalize aging dams, implement other social and environmental improvements. We've partnered with our national laboratories, Oak Ridge, for example, Oak Ridge National Lab, to develop a comprehensive non-power dam characteristics inventory. This can help understand all of the different characteristics and attributes of non-power dams and how you can better assess the potential in your state, in your region. This data set, along with other cost and generation modeling tools, is used to help, you know, really support Pennsylvania identify high priority non-power dam retrofits. And over the course of the last probably about 12 months, really, we've gone from a list of about 2,000 sites down to potentially 5 sites where Pennsylvania is looking to, you know, invest some dollars to start powering some MPDs. We're looking to find ways to streamline this challenge of adding power, provide technical assistance, and we're always looking for industry partners to work on these challenges. Next slide. Another report we've done, I think this was a couple of years ago now, we came out with a resource assessment on conduit hydropower. Partnering with Oak Ridge National Laboratory, we found that opportunities to develop hydro exist in almost every state, and we could potentially add up to 1.4 gigawatts of new capacity. Most of this was in agriculture, but there was also a significant amount found in municipal sectors and industrial sectors. And according to this report, the U.S. has the potential to double its existing currently installed conduit hydropower capacity if we can provide more resources or provide more efforts to expand that potential. The largest resource potential was found to be in the western U.S., specifically California, Colorado, Washington, Nebraska, and Oregon. Next slide. So another study we've done, I think this was with Pacific Northwest National Lab, was the small hydropower facilities to connect to the electric grid. So this study was looking at the size, cost, timing, and location of small hydro projects and how we can support connecting them, giving developers and owners the understanding and the resources to help grasp what it really takes to connect and develop small hydropower. So looked at the costs and timelines, and it helped give operators a better upfront understanding of those costs and timing considerations when it comes to, grid connecting their small hydro projects. And most of those facilities were about 20 megawatts or less, and really helped them decide whether or not it was feasible to interconnect some of their small facilities to the grid and what the undertaking means to them. Next slide. Another toolkit we produced, I think this was also with Oak Ridge, was our environmental decision toolkit. I think it was Malcolm who was talking about the challenges of relicensing. We know that the average time to relicense a facility is 7.5 years. It's a long time. There's a lot of challenges, both financially and timing-wise, when it comes to relicensing a facility, and understanding all the different environmental impacts, the studies that may or may not be needed, the mitigation that may or may not be needed is a challenging process. So with the help of Oak Ridge National Lab, we developed this cool toolkit to characterize and summarize the best available science for and to be used by the stakeholders to better understand what impacts may be occurring and what studies may need to be done to really provide a consistent methodology for identifying those potential environmental impacts. So the output of this was a interactive questionnaire, a choose your own adventure flowchart type thing, where this tool can ask you some questions and then flows down to more questions to understand what impacts may be affecting your hydro project and what studies you may need to focus or may not need to focus on. Help streamline and hopefully speed up that 7.5-year process. Next slide. So we talked about there's a lot of resources that are needed to understand the permitting process. I can't remember if anyone mentioned FERC already, but when it comes to relicensing and looking for all the documents necessary, we partner with P&L to build the Hydropower e-library. This is not FERC's e-library. I want to be clear about that, but it taps directly into FERC e-library. Anyone who knows who's worked with it, it can be a bit of a challenge. There's a lot of information in there. It's hard to fully find everything you're looking for at times. So P&L helped to develop this tool to help stakeholders better navigate the licensing process, access information about their hydropower projects, in an aim to make it easier for all users to find and access their hydropower specific data on FERC's website. We've talked to FERC extensively on this. They found it very helpful and useful, and we're continuing to build out its functionality and use to go in there. And it's a complementary tool, but really it helps to make it easier to navigate the relicensing process, the licensing process, and finding all those information you need on your energy projects. Next slide. Similarly, we worked with the National Renewable Energy Lab to develop what we call the RAPID Toolkit, which was a way to navigate the system of all federal and state regulations, not just FERC, to help secure your project approvals. As we know, this is one of the biggest hurdles for developers. So there's links to the different permit applications, the processes manuals. There's information on the various regulatory approvals required, best practices for how to navigate that regulatory process, all hoping to reduce the permitting timeline, making it easier to communicate among all the project stakeholders, and potentially lower the project costs and investor risks by clarifying that permitting process for future hydropower development. Next slide. I think that's it. Want to just include a link so if folks are interested, they can sign up for our newsletters about all our different research that we're conducting, our funding opportunities we're presenting in areas you can find out about the great work we're doing and the folks we're partnering with. But I think that's it for my slides, and happy to pass it over back to Commissioner Plant, and we can start taking questions.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Corey. That was a fantastic presentation, and also some really great resources there for the viewers to be able to take advantage of. We do have one question that came in during the presentations, and so I invite everybody to come back on, and you can fight over who wants to answer this one. So this first question is talking about a project from about 30 years ago that was rejected by FERC. The questioner estimates there's about 2 gigawatts of storage capacity that is available through, well, in this particular case, these were iron mines, abandoned iron mines in New Jersey that are full of water and can be used as a pumped storage, and that was rejected by FERC, but seems like a great battery storage opportunity. So she was asking, why isn't this old resource being pursued again? Or maybe it is. Throw it out to to anybody who wants to.
I'll start. I'll just say that pump storage is a huge resource. I said earlier, it's 22 gigawatts, 96% of energy storage. We haven't built any major new pump storage in the US in a generation. Literally, 2004 was the last major facility that went online. But something has changed in the marketplace in the last 18 months. We now have, I believe, 96 different projects somewhere in the FERC pipeline for, Corey, correct me if I get this wrong, but last I heard it was like over 90 gigawatts. It was some incredible amount of potential generation. Now, obviously, not all those projects are ultimately going to get built, but I do feel like we've gone from having some merchant independent power producers having already gotten licensed for several facilities and they're just trying to get the financing in order, to now we've got Duke and TVA and Pacificor looking at pump storage. I think they're grappling with the same problems that you probably are in your state. You've got a lot of variable load coming online, and how do you firm it up? And batteries are a great short-term solution, but you need long duration solution. So there's a lot of interest in pump storage. And I don't know about that particular New Jersey project, but I don't know, Corey, I think it was one of the national labs that did a study of the potential using either coal mines or abandoned mines, and found there was huge number of potential sites for both pump storage and hydropower.
Yeah, there's a number of great potential opportunities out there for abandoned mines, and we've been looking at it for years. I can't, like Malcolm, I don't know the specifics behind this one facility mentioned, but I do know there's a greater interest in trying to figure out ways we can tap our existing resources, like these abandoned mines, that we can couple with pump storage. Not funded by my office of water power, but I think it was the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration. There is a $81 million grant going to build the Lewis Ridge Pump Storage Facility in Kentucky, and I think it's a former coal mine, if I remember correctly. And so we're actively looking at ways to do this type of development in pump storage. It's hard, right? I mean, for all the reasons we've mentioned here, putting in any new facility is a lot more challenging in this day and age compared to where it was 50 years ago, with all the permitting and regulations, and not to mention the cost. I think that's been one of the biggest challenges that developers have had, is one, just the cost of resources, the timing and supply to acquire those resources. We've all seen inflation in the last couple of years, but it's really been a challenge to the industry from folks that we've heard, and it's slowed development down. So we've been working with Malcolm and other partners in the industry to try to figure out ways, and especially in the federal fleet, to make it easier for bringing down those costs, or making that supply chain a little easier to manage, with getting the components and the parts necessary to develop new hydropower and new pump storage. But it's hard. We're actively looking at ways to tap all the potential we got, and this is one area.
Yeah, it brings up a good question. The person who proposed this question mentioned that it didn't pass the FERC permitting process. I'm not sure if that was because of the time required or what it might have been, but there have been some changes in the FERC permitting process, particularly for smaller hydro, low impact hydro kind of projects over that intervening period. Do you know, has there been any streamlining or any kind of process improvements at FERC for approval of pump storage, particularly in these kinds of innovative applications?
I guess I'll take that one. There have been a few small changes, but nothing as dramatic as the industry is certainly asking for. There is pending legislation to try to have kind of streamline the process into a 3-year FERC process, particularly for closed loop pump storage, where you're off river, where you don't have migratory fish, where it's really just between two ponds that maybe are artificial ponds and don't have the same kind of environmental concerns. Or, as increasingly being done these days, you've got one existing reservoir and you're just building one new one. So you don't have to build two, you don't have to build an upper and a lower because one already exists. I think in San Diego, they're looking at a water storage facility that's been in place for 50 years. Hey, let's take advantage of that and connect it to some pump storage. I'll also, given the NARUC Utility Commissioner audience, I would encourage you to look at your own state procurement processes. When you're looking for resource adequacy shortfalls and saying, hey, we need new generation, is there a mechanism to get the new generation in a longer term? Can you get long duration assets? If you require the new generation to be online in 3 years, by definition, you're excluding a whole host of water power technologies that are going to take longer than that to get licensed and built. But if if these assets are going to last for 50-year permit, and frankly, they can last forever, you should have a separate category for your IRP planning or resource adequacy planning, and a mechanism to procure those kind of long duration assets that need to be part of your mix. And I think, Tom, that Colorado has something like that, or is experimenting with something like that.
Yeah. Thank you. And you brought up fish, Malcolm. So I wanna make sure I pitch this over to Clark, who's working up in the Northwest. I mean, I've heard a lot. I'm in Colorado, so we don't have a lot of the same issues as in the Northwest. But there have been some real advances in hydropower as it relates to the release of water temperature. You know, instead of coming from the bottom of the reservoir where the water is very cold and impacting fish populations downstream, there's been modifications so that there isn't that kind of temperature impact on the fish population. But in the Northwest, you have a variety of issues around salmon and salmon migration. And maybe, Clark, you could talk a little bit about what RiverPartners is doing in engaging on those issues around salmon recovery.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, for the question. And I would say that not just RiverPartners, but everyone that's supporting Bonneville as customers, but the non-federal partners, we're all invested in salmon recovery and wildlife protection throughout the basin. We understand that salmon is culturally very important to all residents of Northwest, and obviously very culturally significant to the number of sovereign Native American tribes we have here in the region. We're looking for solutions that we can support because we think that hydropower is part of the solution for protecting salmon. The research that we've looked at suggests that the ocean conditions have a pretty significant impact on salmon, and hydropower as a carbon-free resource and has offset millions of tons of carbon emissions just from the Northwest alone over time is part of that solution, not only from a temperature standpoint, from an acidification standpoint, from a food web standpoint for salmon who spend years in the ocean before they return to our rivers to spawn. And we're investing through Bonneville's rates, through customer dollars alone, about $700 million annually in what is probably the largest salmon and wildlife recovery program of its kind in the world. We're seeing good results. On average, over time, we're seeing more and more salmon return to the Columbia and Snake River basins. But we're also seeing fluctuations based on what we think are mostly about ocean conditions or other factors, because dammed and undammed rivers are seeing the same type of fluctuations on returning salmon as we are here in the Northwest. But we're making good progress. We've seen good returning salmon, and we're trying to find ways that we can make additional tweaks and investment to the system. I would just say that the federal fleet has had a ton of investments over the last 2 decades to put in place removal spillway weirs, turbine upgrade technologies. The non-federal dams are in the same boat. So I think there's a constant effort to try and do what we can to modify the infrastructure, make adjustments to the system to make sure that we're not only are we generating the hydropower we need, but also making the changes we need to support salmon and other wildlife recovery.
Great. Well, Corey, Clark, Malcolm, thank you so much for your presentations today and for participating in this webinar. I wanted to mention that the recording of this webinar, as well as any of the other innovation webinars, are available at the NARUC website. It's at naruc.org/event/innovation-webinars. There's going to be a link in the chat for people who want to access that. And, you know, I really appreciate all 3 of you. You know, this is what I'm assuming the oldest form of renewable electricity that we have, and has
America's first renewable, according to DOE.
has undergone a lot of modernization over the last many decades, and so it's great to hear about the developments that are happening. And thanks again to all of you for participating in the webinar.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Thanks,
Have a good
Nehru.
day.
Good
Thank you so
Nazio.
much.